about a different perspective that Job should be looked upon. I get the sense, again, I can't verify it, but I get the sense that he feels a little sorry for Job. And that he thinks that he's actually going to be, the white hat in this situation. So you're not wrong. I wouldn't dare say you're wrong on this one, Meg. So it's a good assessment about him. But he does encourage Job to listen carefully and to respond if he has something to say. So he seems to display respectability. And I believe that part of that is culturally as well, because, to respect the older guys. So, but he does seem to be an adherent to respect and to the elder, the guys that are older than him. Go ahead, Meg.
So I like how verse 12 starts, like when he's speaking about the greatness of God. And I think it's just like one of my favorite verses in this chapter was when he says, behold, in this thou art not just, I will answer thee that God is greater than man. And the way that he's speaking in these like first opening, like 12 through 16, he's basically saying like, God is God. He doesn't have to make it, talking about his sovereignty, like he doesn't have to make his matters known to anybody. And I think that's just a beautiful portrayal of the sovereignty of God. Like, why are we in a state where we're even acting as if God has to make his matters known? Job, he's not answering you right now, right? Mm-hmm. But does he have to? Mm-hmm. Is he still God?
Right.
Absolutely he is. Mm-hmm. I think it's just beautiful about God's sovereignty just in all of this. I mean, I'm Team Elihu. I'm sorry, y'all.
So you're right. And so like I said, again, I don't believe his intentions were to condemn Job at all. I don't believe that. I do believe that in his heart of hearts, I think that he really did want to justify Job, and in his mind instruct Job. So I definitely believe that's his tone, and I think that his tone is definitely significantly more gentle than that of the other guys, and he is presenting his argument in more of an instructive way rather than in an accusatory way. And I think this is important for us to lay hold of. And I think that Elihu, like I said, I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he has evil intentions. I believe that Job's other three friends, I believe that they saw some advantages by his affliction, and in their minds, his sort of downfall from grace in his mind. Sister Day, go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry, I hit the wrong button.
All right, no problem.
How are you doing? Hi, guys. So yes, I was listening, and I remember when I read this the first time, Elihu, and you do at first when you read it in hindsight, you seem like, oh, this young spirited mouth, youth, but then as time goes on, sometimes when you kind of read something over again and you take your time, and like you see that he is kindled within himself, because he sees the conversation and that to me, I felt like he felt that there wasn't an answer being spoken, so he's being kindled in his spirit. I don't know if you've ever been kindled in the sense that when you hear somebody speak something and in the spirit, you know it to be true, and you like your heart will beat faster, and you got to speak, you know what I'm saying? And you become more fiery and moved to do so. And he later addresses this, and he says, because he mentions about his fearing, he mentions about the age, the wisdom, he knows where he stands in his position of his youth and everything, and he waits his turn, he's explaining himself, and, and he says that, where am I reading? I want to make sure I get it right. Because he speaks that in which that he is moved in spirit to do so, from what I'm remembering. I'm just trying to find out where it is. You know what I'm saying? So that he takes his time, that he is moved in his spirit to speak.
Right.
You know what I'm
Amen.
saying? He's
Yep.
being unctioned. He even takes a breath before he speaks. He weighs it out. He says, and I will, he says that I may take a breath. I will open my lips and will answer. And so you see him probably in most taking a more step back in his youth, and
Right.
knowing that I shouldn't speak unless I should speak, and let those speak before me. And that he says that he doesn't speak of himself, that he speaks because the Spirit moves him to speak. I
Right.
know it says somewhere in here, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I remember this part because I've read it a few times. I get it. I don't think that he's so much, you know what I mean? I do know what you're saying, brother, in a sense of like, there have been situations that I've been in where you've had the youth jump in conversation without weighing anything. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yep. Absolutely true.
But he speaks of being kindled to speak so, and he
Right.
steps back before he says anything.
Right. Got it. Absolutely. Sister Lisa, and then Sean.
Well, a thought just occurred to me as Sister Day was speaking, and here we have this young man, speaking, giving his basic take on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now we all know the story. We all know that Job is an innocent man.
Mm-hmm.
Yet Elihu has taken the position, even though it's gentler and might seem kinder. I think this may be a lesson to us. He's not correct. He is opening his mouth, and in chapter after chapter, and then it goes on to later on, we see him actually accusing as he gets frustrated because not hearing anything. I'm wondering if he should have been saying anything at all. Like it's not our place.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, we talked about this early on in the chapters. Job's position and he's still in the same position.
Mm-hmm.
And I think thinking that sometimes we think we have a right to say something. And, as Sister Day just said, he was moved to speak, but who was moving him to speak?
Right.
He might have thought it's the Spirit, but again, we still have Satan trying to get Job to curse the Lord. So I think there's just times when we need to just, be present rather than, going
Right.
along long speeches and all that, especially when we find out they're incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
mean, like you said, God doesn't say to him, Job, you should have listened to Elihu. You should have listened to him, Job.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has all the answers.
Yeah.
So I would take it as a lesson for us, to consider, even if we do attempt to speak with a brother or sister in kindness, and we don't know the answer, maybe we just say, I don't know, but I'm here to support you. Right. I'm here to pray with you, rather than these long-winded speeches about how we think it's going to, whether we're, if we want to say God is good and everything is for a purpose and we know God, that's one thing.
Right.
And, Elihu does throw that in there. He does throw some praise into the Lord. But again, we're still, we want Job. We want Job to just confess, Job.
Right. Yeah.
Just confess.
Right. Yeah. Elihu is somebody who, like we said, he's a person of youth, and he has a tendency to believe that things have changed and he's more progressive in his outlook, which may or may not be true. Which may or may not be true. But he's the kind of guy that, at least from what I read, is that he has a very good way of speaking, even though he may say things that may be somewhat kind of cutting, like the last one that really gets to me. Hold your peace, and I'm going to teach you wisdom. Like he's already made an assumption that he's going to teach Job wisdom. And I got to think that it would be hard to hear that from this young guy, you know. But again, we don't really know what the conversation, how it really sounded in person. But I'm just saying, from my perspective, when I read it, what comes into my head when I see it, and he's speaking very boldly. He's saying some very bold things. And so, but I do believe that his tone is definitely more gentle than the rest of the guys, and that he's coming from a different direction, and he's adding other elements that ought to be considered. And no, Meg asked the question, does being young mean one lacks wisdom? Yes and no. You can have a lot of people, like for instance, you find a lot of new Christians that run around. And when I say young, I'm talking about not just young as Christians, but I also mean young in age, that can be so excited and so zealous about things that what they do, and I had a conversation with somebody today about this, where people go, where they go around and they chase after facts, but they never lived in a way where they had the opportunity to develop wisdom, which is the result of taking these biblical truths and living your life and going through life and having things happen where you have to apply these truths. Some people live completely off facts. That's all they know. That's all they know. And so, yes, it does not necessarily mean that they don't have any wisdom, but wisdom is usually the result of experience. It just is. There is no automatic wisdom that befalls you when you become a Christian. And yes, David was young and he wrote the Psalms, but he didn't write the Psalms when he was a boy. You know, so David had a lot of experiences that gave him wisdom as he got older, going through his experience and applying these truths that God opened his mind to. So yeah, so over time you get that. But wisdom is usually the fruit of applying God's truth and seeing them work itself out in your life over a period of time. And wisdom is something that we always are developing, as we're always growing from it. Sister Sean.
Yeah, I agree with Sister Lisa. I think that Elihu, I was just wondering where did he even come from? Because you know
Right. Yeah.
the Bible tells us, the scripture tells us that it was his three friends, but now we
Right.
have this extra character, and I
Mhm.
think that I think he brings up a different point, but it's
Mhm.
still not correct when it comes to Job.
Right.
Nobody is correct when it is applied to Job, and
That's
so
right.
therefore it's like it's kind of meaningless
Mhm.
because you're not talking about my situation.
Mhm.
How are you really helping me if you're not talking about my situation? And
Right.
so then it's just a bunch of talking.
Right.
And just to point out the fact that it says that when you go back to 32, when they introduce Elihu, it says that his wrath was kindled against Job.
Mhm.
And so we have this extra character who's also mad at Job,
Mhm.
but he's going to mask it
Mhm.
and come differently.
See, that's the way I see him too, because you're right. He wasn't one of the guys that they got together and convened and said, "Hey, let's go visit our friend Job." He seems like to be somebody who's like in the background. And again, I wasn't there, but he seems to be this kind of guy that was in the background, listening to everything, and then going, "These guys, these old guys, they need to listen to me. I'm the one that's going to tell Job what's really going on. I'm going to teach these guys." He thinks he's the instructor of these men, but I agree with you because he still doesn't answer Job. He still doesn't diagnose the situation accurately. He just doesn't. And so what his intentions are don't really matter, unless he was doing it for some bad reasons. But again, we don't know. And as you said, Sister Sean, he came out of nowhere. It's like, as far as we know, he didn't even know who Job was. We know from scripture that the other men, they knew who Job was. They knew of his experience. And this guy comes in and he's, we got 6 chapters of this guy talking. He talks more than all the rest of them. And he has a tendency to be, very duplicative in what he says. He's saying a lot of the same things over and over again. And so now we get to verse 1 of chapter 34. And it says, furthermore, Elihu answered and said, again, here we go again. Hear my words, O ye wise men. Give ear unto me, you that have knowledge. For the ear tries words as the mouth tastes meat. Let us choose to do us judgment. Let us know among ourselves what is good. Now, it's interesting to me, because when you read these words, you gotta really pay attention to what he's talking about, because he uses a very backhanded way. Like he just got through telling us that he's going to teach Job wisdom. But then he says, hear my words, O ye wise men. And it's almost like he's like, it's like, you're wise men, but I just told you, I'm going to teach you wisdom. But then he addresses them as wise men now. And then he says, give ear unto me, you that have knowledge. So now he's saying not only that they're wise, but that they have knowledge. And so what he's presenting himself as someone whose knowledge is going to be transcendent. This is how he talks. And so I see him as a man of pride and arrogance. He's smarter than everybody. He gets into the conversation. He hasn't experienced anything. He doesn't have, the battle scars of a servant, but he knows everything. It's like, I remember when I was in the Navy, whenever you get these new officers that come in, they would be like 21, 22, 23, 24 years old. They'd be young. These young guys. And you have all these enlisted guys who are older and have been around the block or whatever. And these guys come in, they're able to give orders and whatever, but they haven't been battle tested yet. They haven't been out to sea. They haven't experienced all these things. And not that that's bad. They have to learn, but they come in there sometime thinking that they know things. And it could be that they could know from an educational standpoint. They've been in the classroom. They've been learning how to chart and plot courses to navigate ships. But it's a big difference when you actually have to do it. And so, like Brother Joseph says, zeal without experience. That's exactly how I see Eliphaz. A whole lot of zeal, very little experience. He's the kind of guy to me that's like what we always talk about. He knows what he believes, but he hasn't really connected all these dots yet. And he certainly probably hasn't had any of the experiences like Job is currently undergoing. So it's hard to tell. Sister Lisa, go ahead.
I just got a question, and it's bugging me with this guy, because why does he even think he has any right to speak on it? Do you know what I mean? Like, why does he feel the need that the friends need to hear his opinion? He needs to. This is why I think that he's being used as another one of Satan's last ditch attempts to get everybody riled up, because
Right.
as this guy Sister Sean was speaking, he just sort of appears there. He's young, he know. Did he mention? I think he mentioned earlier. I was sitting and listening and waiting. What are you waiting for? Who are you?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah, he's sitting back like, yeah, let me listen. Let me let these old men get their words out, and then I will step in. And like I said, I'm going to come in with the white hat, and I'm going to straighten everybody out. And that's what I feel about this guy. That he, and Job, to me, really shows his wisdom by his silence. It's almost like he's like, oh gosh, here we go. That's how I would be. It's like, okay, now I'm done here. I had enough. Let him talk. I mean, some of us have seen some of these lives, right? Where people argue, right? And you got everybody arguing. There's always that one holdout, or that person that jumps up and says, well, you know what? I've been listening to everybody, and everybody's been saying this and everybody's been saying that. But let me tell you how it really is. That's this guy to me. That's this guy. He's the guy that's going to come in here and just, I'm going to solve everything. I'm going to solve, and everybody's going to go away happy, and everybody's going to be informed, and I'm going to impart my wisdom to them. That's this guy. That's the way I see him. Sister Meg and then Sean.
I think that if we look before Elihu speak, like in chapter 31, like after Job spoke, like his friend's theology, I think it was that the chapter that was really small. After the last person spoke, it was Bildad, correct? No. Was it Bildad that spoke?
It was Eliphaz, I believe.
It was Eliphaz. That small chapter. So everybody had spoken. Their arguments ran out. It's like they have been all depleted. We get to a small chapter. Job speaks. He's taken on a roller coaster, right, with his words before God. And Elihu comes in when that's ran out. And so I think that, do I think he's being a little prideful? Yeah. But what we also have to understand is that humans are not going to deliver things as God would. So in an expectancy that we have of people, they're still human, right? But there is, for us, I think that we're reading a lot of good wisdom. And to say that from what I've read so far and what we're about to read, we see a lot of good wisdom in these chapters coming up. And I honestly feel that his heart is to bridge the gap. You know, when we know that Elihu can't justify him before God, but I think that he's trying to, even in his maybe prideful state of his arrogance that he is, I believe Elihu has a good heart. And I think he was quiet because the elder spoke first. And I think because he knew his place, because he knew he was young, that he didn't speak and he was silent. So to me, that's respectable of someone who is younger. But you know what I mean? I think that's very respectable. And the fact that he held his peace shows that, yeah, he may be zealous right now, but he's held it for the entire time that these people were making cases against Job, trying to tell him that he was wicked, totally 100% falsely accusing him. When to me, I see Elihu as, from what we've read so far and from what I read ahead, he is focused on showing who God is to Job. And I think that even though he may be a little bit arrogant, I understand because he's still man. And I think that, you know, sometimes we expect people to be perfect in their delivery or maybe not. But what's being delivered is something much more than even the older men had to offer. That's how I see it right now. I mean, and even reading further in the chapters.
I get it. Sister Sean, what do you think?
I think that Elihu was crafty because when you look at the scripture, it says that he was angry at Job and the three friends. So that lets us know that Elihu has been here since the beginning, and yet it doesn't tell us that he came with the friends.
Right.
And verse 4 is triggering for me. It's like red flag for me because he said, "Let us know amongst ourselves what is good." But you told us that God sent you.
Right.
So what you said that God sent you. So aren't you supposed to be telling us what God said is good? But we're
Right.
supposed to form this judgment to find out what's good.
Yep.
It's like he's very crafty.
And you know, and see, he says, and this is what we can never forget. He says to Job, he says this. He goes, your wish has come true. I'm going to speak to you in God's stead. He says this. None of the other guys said that. But he says this. See, he really thinks he's speaking for God. He's that guy that says, God told me to tell you this about you. You see what I mean? And so I agree with you on this situation. I think he is a very shrewd speaker. He's very shrewd. It takes it takes somebody bold and audacious to go, your wish, Job, you wanted to hear from God? Well, your wish has come true. He sent me to straighten you out and to tell you what's going on. It's really heavy. But you know what? I love this conversation because it's enlightening. It's good to see how everybody is seeing this guy, because he's different. He is different. And he's the kind of guy that is very hard to tell where he stands. He's slippery. And so you can see, even in us talking about it, the variances in how we see it. But we were all in agreement with how the other three were. But this guy is different. He's different. So to me, he comes off somebody who's been I wouldn't necessarily say trained, although that can be the case. But I agree. I think he's a crafty one. He's shrewd. And for him to say that, and this is that was one of the big verses that really got me going, was when he says that your wish has come true. I'm going to speak in God's stead. I'm God's voice to you. And to me, that's a very dangerous statement. A very dangerous statement. None of those other men spoke like that. None of them. Sure, they said some bad things about Job, but they said a lot of truth that just didn't apply to Job. And they may have had ulterior motives for attacking Job. But this guy's different. He's different. And he very well, in some kind of way, could be worse than them all. He could be. He could be. We don't know that he is. We don't know that he's not. But what I do know is that God decided to step in and shutting him up. And we're all thankful for it. But remember, he's the one that God breaks in and says, basically, I had enough. Let me talk to my servant directly. So Elihu was no prize platter. He's part of that group. He just has a different perspective and a different angle, which sounds really good. Sister Vanessa.
Yeah, what I want to say is I really think that Elihu is overstepping his reasoning. But I also think that he doesn't realize that Job suffering like he does. Extreme suffering can lead a righteous man to say things he doesn't really mean.
That's true.
Because he still has faith. Job still has the faith.
Right.
And no one is realizing that because Satan's in the midst. And so nobody's realizing that he's in so much pain, and he is trying to explain to them that he knows he's suffering because of God, but he thinks God has left him because he hasn't talked to him at all.
Right.
So, and Elihu is not the most full of wisdom like everybody thinks he is.
I certainly don't. I think he's a shrewd character in this story. I think he really is. Mariah, and then Day, and then Pat.
Yeah, it's interesting for me to hear. I was listening to Sister Meg, and a few chapters earlier when Job was talking about how he was righteous and I have done this for the community, I've done that.
Right.
It was depicted as, maybe Job is in error in this sense, and then I was listening to you, Sister Meg, and then, Elihu, in the same fashion, we can see some type of pride and arrogance in him, and him saying he's going to speak for God, but we don't see God saying that he sent him. He says that he's going to speak from his opinion and all of these things. And then we're to count him as maybe he has some type of men are fallible and things of that nature. But I think that we should keep that same understanding on both ends, because Job isn't claiming, well, he was on the verge of speaking for God in the sense when he said that he has caused the men to come against him and things of that nature. But I just thought that was very interesting, knowing that he is plainly saying, your wish is my command. Basically, you want to hear from God, I'm here to do so. That is crazy thing to say.
Right.
And to be so condescending and calling people wise men and they have knowledge, but I'm going to teach you some knowledge. That is like, so again, I think that I'm on the same boat. Like, he has some arrogance, and maybe young people do, they have this zeal and this arrogance about them that they have seen it all, even though they don't know it all, type of thing.
Yeah, and it can make when you're young, it can make your witness a little reckless, especially if you're one of these people who's very vocal and is very boisterous speech wise and verbose and always saying things and and just blurting everything out as soon as something is said. And he is a guy like I agree. I don't necessarily I don't go one way or the other in terms of his intention, because one of the things about a youthful person sometimes is that the zeal is genuine, but it's the application of that zeal that can somehow come off in a way that is not productive. But one point you bring up, Mariah, that I do like is that we do see that Elihu refers to himself about in terms of having the answers. I have the answers. I'm going to teach you wisdom. I'm going to do this. And he's like, hear my words. I'm going to give my opinion. God, I'm in God's stead. That's how he's talking. That's how he's talking. And so, and I think that Job was probably like, I'm not even going to start in with this guy. That's how I feel like, because that's how I think I would feel in that situation. Like almost as if I'd rather hear from the other guys than this dude, but that's, it's a lot here. It's a lot here and it's good.